Hello everyone and welcome back to season 2 of the PGN Podcast. This podcast has one simple message: to normalise the conversation on resilience, our environment and our future in a climate changed world, with our communities at the heart of it all. Our primary goal is to foster discussions about flooding, climate resilience and related environmental issues to better support communities. We're here to take a deeper dive into the conversations we began in season 1. We will be connecting hearts and minds, ambition, passion alongside our community and experts. Together we'll work towards building a more resilient future in our ever-changing world. I am Meshi Taka, the project lead for Project Groundwater Northumbria, which is what PGN stands for, and your host for this season. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the PGN Podcast and today's special community series. We have Lynn joining us again. Lynn Thompson. So Lynn is the PGN STEAM lead and she was with us for series 1. Welcome back, Lynn. Have you been?
I've been good, thank you very much.
Change of name,
Change of name, yes.
So formerly Chapman, now Thompson.
Yeah.
Well, so Lynn, thank you for joining us today. Over the summer, while we were at the Innovation Festival, we brought the podcast team along and set up a pop-up podcast on the grounds. And we got the chance to speak to a lot of the attendees at the festival, just around flooding, what experiences they've had, what knowledge and that kind of thing. And we had some really interesting feedback. So today we're going to look through some of the footage from that session.
Yeah.
And just talk through what we see. You up for it?
Okay, I'm up for it. Let's see. Let's
go. Let's go. Hi everyone. We are here at Northumbrian Waters Innovation Festival speaking to communities, hearing about what matters most when we talk about flooding and how we can help them become more resilient and more informed.
Can I just say, do you know what I loved about that?
What?
The painting on the head.
Yeah, the face painting was
great. The face
painting
painting was really good, actually. And you know what? I think that captured the spirit of Innovation Festival because it's the most corporate, uncorporate event you'll probably ever attend. So there's that real serious element of trying to capture innovation, new ideas, exactly what PGN is doing, but
having a great time,
having fun doing it. And I think that's when people get creative, when they're having fun, when we can colour our faces, put we called them Billy Stampers when we were young, but I don't know what the kids call them now. Those like little stickers that you put on and stuff like that. That I think we should capture that because that's really, really important. I think.
Did that take you back?
It did. It just takes you straight back, and you're just there, and it's like, you know, they've got the tuck shop, like the sweet shop kind of thing, and they've got the fish and chips. And I mean, it's not all about food, obviously there's work as well, but it's just that engagement, seeing the different people, working with different people that you wouldn't normally necessarily work with. I think is what's fun about the whole Innovation Festival. But I think just capturing the spirit of your face, talking there with the little painting on it, really captures what innovation's about. It's about finding new ways, playing with old ideas and coming up with new concepts to try and move things forward.
We always go back there. We love it.
First question for you. Has flooding ever affected you?
Actually, one of your colleagues that just asked me, what did I think about flooding? I had to stop to think, have I ever thought about flooding? And then it struck me, yes, I have, because Warrington can be prone to flooding. Certain communities on the River Mersey. And my son was buying his first property about a year ago. And that's when it first struck me that I thought the property that he's looking at, is that in a flood-prone area? Is that something that I need to think about? We need to think about. Is that a risk? Should it be a property that we're going to consider?
Oh, so that's really good, because when you think about how long the Environment Agency maps have now been out, and it was just a tool that primarily I used working in the lead local flood authority to help assess on planning applications for the drainage element when the local planning authority would ask for a consultation. The fact that it's actually reaching wider and people are thinking about using those maps at a local level to understand what the risks are where they live is really important. Because I also remember an article on the news where I can't remember where the flooding was. It was around the 2012 flooding. And this guy had literally moved into his house that day and it was flooded. And I was the newsreader was interviewing him, and he was a young man. I don't know how resilient he was. He was trying to bail all this war out. I was crying for him because I was like, you've waited so long, you've done the conveyance, you've getting the solicitors to sign everything off, and then that devastation happens, you know what I mean? And it also, a lot of the time, some people, especially when they're getting a new home and it's a first time buy-in, like for her son, the parents might say, well, stay with us, we'll make sure we decorate it, we'll get the painting done, we'll get you new carpets. Yeah. And before you've even set foot in, you've lost it all. You've lost it all. It's sad though, isn't it? Yeah. It's a lot to take in. So the fact that somebody's saying, oh, there's maps out there, you know, and I think like what we're trying to do with PGN and get the ground, like develop mapping for groundwater and things, it'll further inform people, because at the moment the maps are just on surface water. There is some mapping as well from the Coal Authority that sort of shows you where the mine blocks are, like mining areas are. Yeah. But there's nothing there for the groundwater. And I think the better a picture we can build for people,
integrated picture,
the more informed they are, the more resilient people will come, and they will be able to find ways to better protect the homes and make more informed decisions. So I think that's
and plan for emergencies as well. So the emergency planning is a key thing, where if something does happen, you have a plan in place and how to get out. You have an emergency kit, and if you have resilience measures in your home, at least you can reduce the impact of it. So it's a bigger picture thinking, though, isn't it? Long-term resilience.
It's not even just that, though, because picking up on that, when my friend was buying her house and she's in a wheelchair, and she was like, Lynn, I've gone on the Environment Agency maps, I've looked at them, and I'm not actually in a flood zone. I was like, so I went on, I had a look, I went, you might not be in a flood zone, but your street and your exits out are.
Yes.
I said, so if you're going to buy there, the emergency responders probably could get you out, but it's already making it more complicated for yourself to get out, because it's not just a case of, oh, I'll wheel myself along, you know, you're going to actually come across obstacles once you're out of the property. And the other thing people don't often realise as well, when emergency planning, it's all your gas and electric, all your utilities, all your internet goes down, and the police, the fire service, all these other services, they only have so many resources. And if they evacuate an area and you decide to stay, you're kind of going to be there on your own, and you might not have the electricity or the things that you need, because they need to move on with their resources. So it's quite involved when you stop and you think about it. It's not just a straightforward, oh yeah, let's fly with this, we'll just get that. It's like, no, actually you need to think about it.
And usually when it happens, it's kind of like in a fight though. You're under duress, you're frightened. So if you have a plan already in place, all you have to think about is implementing your plan, as opposed to having to think in that moment, who do I need to call, where do I need to go, what do I do about a myriad of things. So it just helps your survival really in a situation that nobody wants to be in, but many of us will have to be in at some point.
And I think the other thing that we need to start thinking about a little bit more is, at the moment, everything's set up for adults. All the information out there is for adults, and there's a whole generation of younger people who are relying on adults to get them the information that they need, or to give them the resources, you know. And like a lot of the time you hear kids have been stuck in schools for hours, and it's like, that's, for a small child, as much fun as I know the teachers would make it, because they're amazing, but that's quite scary for a child, because it's like, we can play so long, but when's my parents turning up? You know what I mean? It's like, what is gonna happen? So it's, from a STEM learning point of view as well, on resilience and emergency planning, there's quite a lot in there really that can be developed and taken on board. So
my back garden floods, and my neighbour's back garden floods really badly. We viewed our house in February when we bought it, like back in 10 years ago. We looked out the back window and we saw the neighbour's back garden, and it's about the size of a tennis court. It's a big garden, one of the reasons why we bought the house, and it was flooded, halfway flooded. We were like, oh wow, God, that doesn't look so good. But actually, over the years of living there and seeing that our garden actually gets a little bit waterlogged as well, come to the idea that I'm not going to engineer a solution to try and fix this, because as long as it's not coming close to the house, particularly next doors, which is far more extreme example, that water is gone within a day of the rain stopping, and my neighbours are obviously very comfortable with it as well.
Do you know what's really interesting about this?
Go on.
So there's a few things in this, like, to completely unpack. First, he's saying, like, you see his neighbour's garden, it flooded and it didn't notice that his was, but then it's slowly creeping up and it's creeping up. And he's like, well, I can't engineer a solution. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's climate change coming on us that fast that it's creeping that much further forward. But the other side is, I don't know what's causing that flooding, obviously. So I'm hoping it's not sewer flooding, because he would have mentioned there was a smell. So we'll say that it's not that. It could be from surface water. It could be seasonal as well, which people, when you see often in people's back gardens, water sitting on the top of the soil, it's not necessarily flooding from groundwater or from surface water. It's the fact that we've got clay soil. And it's just going to be a lot of seasonal wetness because the water is not going to percolate down. So you're going to have a lot of that. And there probably is things...
Well, that's perched groundwater when it sits on top of clay layers.
So you could put like sand in and things like that, mix it in to help it go down. But when he's saying he's not engineering a solution, I just wonder for himself when it's going to become problematic. I think like when's it going to get that far up?
I think what he's getting at is there's an element of nature, that it's nature doing its thing, where the water will sit and naturally drain down. And putting a solution is creating another intervention that would only be limited in capacity. So it's allowing the water cycle to do its thing, which is rain will fall, it will sit, and it will slowly drain down once the conditions permit. And I think there is a conversation around, when we look at flood resilience and flood management, that we should also consider where we allow spaces to hold water in times of rainfall, and then when the rainfall passes and it drains away, they become the function that they usually are, which is kind of what we talk about when we talk about sods, don't we? We basically say we have these grass amenities, which are lovely assets, but when it rains, they hold water. But to your point, I think the idea is great, but what would be really useful is to understand the mechanism of what's happening. I think that is still important, because the thing about groundwater, whether it's perched groundwater, which is when it sits over clay, so it's not actually draining down, although he does say that it drains down after a while, or it's just groundwater rising because so much surface water has come down, so basically it's saturated. It could be a number of things. It's just to understand that sometimes it can have an impact on the structure. So just be self-aware that your building is secure, for example, that you've got damp-proof course around the building, so that sitting water doesn't have a kind of a trickling effect where over time it does have cause damage to the building. But I understand the whole idea that we expect for the water to just go away is really counterproductive to what the natural water cycle does or should do naturally. So it's a really good one.
Do you notice, I was just thinking as well, I would say to him, maybe get like a gardening fork and go out and sort of like bring the back garden, but he said it's the size of a tennis court. He's going to be out there for hours.
It'll be a long one.
It'll be a long one. You need a rotivator one.
And also, you don't go out when it's flooding, because
no.
It's not very safe to be doing that in a flood condition. But
preparation.
Yes.
When I used to live in Las Vegas, actually, there was substantial flash flooding. And I remember one time we drove across the little bridge to go to lunch, and we came back, the bridge was gone, and a bunch of homes had washed away along the wash. And so, I've seen things like that.
Well, I lived in a place called Belper in Derbyshire. That's right on the River Derwent, extremely susceptible to flooding. So every single October, it'd start raining, there's nowhere for the water to go. So there'd be properties down on the main road that goes through sort of that town that would just be flooded every single year, uninsurable, devastates the community.
I think when we're looking at communities and around insurances and things like that, we often think of things like flood re in terms of insurances and getting properties insured. But there's other elements to insurances, because there's a lot of insurance companies now, so you can get life insurance and they'll also offer you health insurance. And I think one of the things around flooding is that PTSD. And there's
the mental health
side of it. If you're getting repeatedly flooded, it's really devastating. And I've sat in lectures where people have talked about how people are actually frightened when it starts to rain, even if it's a tiny little shower that it's not going to do anything, but they're quite scared of that. So I think it's really important to have insurances, but it is really hard as well for people not not to know what insurances to get or where to get help. And there is a wealth of information out there, but I think it's trying to find resources that are going to help you. And it's not as straightforward as you think. You can't always just, you know, how do you demonstrate that you've got PTSD from rain? You can demonstrate you've got PTSD from being in a car accident because you've probably got like a police log or a hospital notification, but because it rained, you know, it's like...
There is research, though. I know the Environment Agency has done fairly recent paper on the mental health impact because of flooding and because of repeated flooding. So there's statistics out there on the likelihood of you taking over your life because it's such a lasting influence, really. I do know, like you, I've spoken to people that are like, they go away on holiday and they're like, the minute they hear it's raining, it ruins the entire holiday because they're just thinking, is my house all right? What I mean? What do I need to do? And you're calling neighbors, you're calling family to just drive past the house and check. And there's a whole series of things that can take you away from the moment because of the fear of flooding happen. And you're right, that's irrespective whether it's a small rainfall event or it's a big one. And I mean, the story there, the guy before who talked about, I drove past one day, there was a bridge that came back and it was gone. It's like, what? And what it does show is that it's not a regional thing. It's not just a regional problem. It's not just a national problem. It's a global problem. And it's one that's getting bigger and bigger year on year. Like a flood wiping away a whole street. Or in the sense of this one, like coming back every year and taking out the street. And these people just living in constant fear. And so when we talk about flood resilience, you're absolutely right. We need to consider the cost to people's health, and that is their mental health as well.
And I think the video before as well, when the guy was saying he was from Vegas, and straight away you're just thinking sand, dry, you know, arid kind of place. You're not expecting to necessarily associate that with big flash flooding and things like that. I mean, was it one of the Arabic countries recently had that crazy storm as well?
I saw that.
And it's like, oh my goodness, like you just... Again, it's probably, it can only be linked to climate change and the changes that's happening, but it's not just in wet places, it's in all climates everywhere. And I think what's concerning is how once you've had like the flash flooding, it's how much damage it's done as well. So then you could get mudslides and all these other things coming on, you know, it's not just a bit of rain and then it's going to go. And for some people, it's a bit of a hot topic. You know, they might be stuck trying to get home, or the guy in Vegas might want to stay in the casino a little bit longer. I don't know, but
casinos were mentioned in that story.
but for other people, it's something that you're living with day in, day out. Like you're right, it's so scary, and they probably sometimes. It's probably easier to know that a big storm's coming because you know it's coming, so you can manage it. It's those ones where you're caught off guard, where you're like, I wasn't expecting this because it was the middle of August, you know, it's...
But then it begs the question, though, because I think for the most part, and it goes to the first lady that spoke, the conversation needs to shift from, do I need to know about flooding because I might flood, to we all need to be aware about flooding. We need to be prepared for flooding because anybody could flood. And I think that's where there is a massive gap in kind of information about flooding. Because there's people who say things like, I live on a hill. I was like, great. But if flooding can get to somebody in the desert, it can get to you on a hill.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
It's that conversation, like less about it's never going to happen to me and more about if it does happen to me, I am prepared. This is what I'm going to do. I can get out safely. I've got an emergency kit. I'll be able to keep me and my family safe. I'll be able to get to the relevant services and I can reduce the impact on my home. So actually recovery is quicker.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
I think mentioning the hill's quite interesting because if it's a road, you know the road's going to be pretty straight and it's just going to have a really good incline on it and it's maybe it's going to run off. But actually when you look at houses on that hill, nobody's house is on an angle. So there's going to be parts where there's little gullies where water can collect, you know, or actually the flow of the water might just be through your whole property to get it right down to the bottom. So it's...
Or groundwater.
Yeah, or groundwater.
Groundwater doesn't discriminate. It can pop up or whatever.
I think that's the thing with flooding, though, isn't it?
And in the case of the northeast, we've got the shallow mine workings, which are basically underground passageway, which we know can move water for miles. So it's very intricate, and I think yes, on one hand we want to gather information and have the intelligence there so we can plan and we can forecast and warn where it's going to come out. But on the other hand, we want people to be prepared and plan for the worst, which means having these measures in place, because they're good measures for any type of emergency. Flooding is just one of them.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Well, there are few stories in my mind. First one is I was born in flood. In 1995, there was heavy rain started in September, 21st or 22nd September, and it lasted for 7 or 8 days. And since India was not that much of flood resilient at that time, so entire North Indian part, particularly Haryana state, is flooded badly. And in the October's first week, on 5th of October, that's my birthday. And the story begins around 7 in the evening. My mother and her brother traveled to a hospital because she was in labor. And after some distance, they fell off in a trench because that road was digged because just to get water from upstream to downstream. Well, with the help of local people, because in India there are a lot of people helping each other. They faced a lot of problem to get my mom to hospital because it was only 8-kilometer journey, and it took 2.5 hours them to reach there.
Oh,
I know.
goodness.
That one we were like, what? It's crazy.
When I went into labour both times, it was a 20-minute drive, and that was probably about the same distance. Where you said 8 kilometres, it was probably about 6 miles, so it was probably about the same.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a bit less. I can't imagine what was going through that poor boy's mum's head. I'm so glad that he made it and he's here and he's healthy now. I'm assuming his mum is as well. But to be dealing with that much pain, the fear
To end up in a ditch as well.
I know.
Yes.
And you just, I mean, giving birth is complicated in itself. You know, there's lots of things that can go wrong, but to have things go wrong on the journey,
in a flood.
In a flood. I mean, that's it. And I'm sure there's lots of people who've had to get to the maternity ward during extreme events. But I mean, I think what was actually really lovely about that story is as much as his mum was in pain, was the community.
Yes.
How the community came together, how the community got his mum, and I think it was his uncle, he said, didn't he?
Yeah.
And him safely to the hospital for him to be born. I think that it's just, it goes to show the level of kindness when things go wrong, people come together and they really push through. But to have to deal with a situation like that, oh my goodness.
Humankind is the kind in human, isn't it?
It is. But that's just, I can't, I mean, you know, we live in a country where you could, if you wanted, you would get an ambulance, or, you know, I can almost imagine the fire service coming along on a main road with like a boat, and like they get you there, but to have to do it like that, it just, wow. Hats off to his mom. That's what I say. What a woman.
We were like,
yeah,
it was amazing. Like, I think somebody went, oh, what's the delivery safe? And we went, yeah, I'm here, right?
It's a really heartwarming story, and it just goes to show how resilient people can be, and how you can get through something. And I mean, I'm sure it's like a story that people look back and laugh on, but I bet you at the time it's goddamn terrifying.
It was no laughing matter at the time. It was, must have been terrifying.
Definitely.
Have I ever experienced flooding? Yes, in my own home, but it was not due to like rain or anything. It was like there was a massive like leak in the bathroom upstairs, and it just went through the floors and it flooded. It was really, really bad. It flooded the house.
Oh, so when we teach kids about flooding,
yes, we
have to start with localized flooding, because if you say to most children, what is flooding, their first answer will not be, oh, well, that's when the surface, the ground becomes covered, the surface just becomes covered in water. They're probably going to tell you that it's a pipe burst, or the sink overflowed because mom left the tap on. or the bath flood.
Why do mums get blamed for stuff like this?
I think it's because we're usually always in the house, aren't we, around the kids most of the time. But
yeah, it's not mums.
The teaching, when we teach children about flooding, it's really important to start with that like local knowledge to them, because we need them to build up a picture. So if you start small, like the kitchen tap overflowed and the sink flooded, and then everybody was going crazy with mops, and mum was telling us to get out and take my switch or my iPad or something like that. Mum was telling us to get out of the house, out the room. It allows them to build up a picture of what that devastation can look like. So the floor, the kitchen floor, or the bathroom floor, or the utility room, or wherever it is now covered in water. And then you can build a picture up to say, well, actually, what do you think would happen if that was on the street and that happened from rain? How do you think we'd cope with that? What do you think we have to do? And children are cheeky. They'd probably say something like, get some really big mops. but it allows them to build a picture of something bigger. And it gets their imaginations going. But then it also allows you to build on that. Like, you can start asking them, well, if that happened in your house, who would clean that up? And they'd probably say, well, mom, dad, aunties, uncles, grandparents, whoever. But then you can ask them, well, who would do that on the street? And then you can introduce them to the concept of different jobs, because they're probably going to say most of the jobs that they would see, like policemen, firemen, people from the water company, they won't necessarily know that there's a whole other world out there of responders, like the resilience teams within councils or the highways departments that have to come out and clean up afterwards. And then if there was any damage to roads and things like that, you can start and introduce them to people like civil engineers, flood analysts, flood modelers, structural engineers, people like that. There's a whole range of jobs. And then there's the how do we tell people about things that are happening, you know, through websites. You can talk about website developers, and you can talk about the different comms teams, the different ways of promoting information, the different ways of getting reliable information out there. So that guy's just talking about a little bath flood, but in terms of STEM, it's really important to go local to go big.
Yeah, I mean, he also picks up on a fundamental point about looking after our homes. Yeah, because when we talk about being prepared and staying prepared, the first step to that is looking after your own drains and looking after your own plumbing and making sure that they're working how they should be. Because when that event happens and your property drainage, whether it's your gullies or your downpipes or even your tiles on your roof, if any of those systems are not in good condition, it makes you even more vulnerable. So yeah, maybe he's thinking, oh, I haven't really flooded, but you're like, well, if that's what happened with the burst pipe. Imagine if something worse.
It's so true though.
Come along.
And if you've got pipes that are running through like a garage into your house, you might want to consider when it's like the winter times to make sure that those pipes are wrapped, because if you get water sitting in them and that water freezes, it's going to expand. And when it expands, it's going to potentially burst, especially in older homes where they've got like metal pipes and things like that. It's going to burst the pipes. You're going to come home to some nice damage there. So,
okay.
One of my great aunties had a flood living in a town called Cockermouth in West Cumbria, which is known for flooding, especially with the way the riverbanks are. This is going back, I would say, about 12 years ago, and she had to move out into a flat, she had to move back in. And I think especially at her being at elderly age as well, it is the effort of and the comfort of moving out, moving back in, other family getting involved. And this has happened more than once. I can recall twice while I've been alive, and I'm sure it has happened more times prior to that, or if it's not been a bungalow directly, so bearing in mind bungalow, you've not even got the upstairs, that area of the town or near the riverbanks, it is the case.
This is there's something about, I think, when it's the really young and the really elderly, where it really pulls on your heartstrings. It makes you want to cry. And I've heard many different tales. I told one in season 1 about the lady with the wallpaper and how she was devastated. I've heard other tales where somebody had to be moved out of their home and they had to be relocated to somewhere else. But what really upset them about the relocation was it didn't match or mimic their style of house. They had this lovely garden, And where they were put, I think, was like in a first floor flat with no garden. So what you're used to, even if it's temporarily, is going to have a really big impact, again, on your mental health. And I think when we're looking at people who are older in life, you've also got other complications, like they might even have early onset dementia or something like that. And they're the kind of people that need more familiarity, because just moving them for a short period of time could really offset their, anyone really, it's quite hard, isn't it?
I think
not having to go resilience teams, because I know how hard it is to relocate, but
I think when we're talking about vulnerable people, that your home can also be like your security blanket. It's a safe space. So anything that takes that away can have a much bigger impact on your life. So yes, you might relocate them, but sometimes because of the demand at the time, because you're working to a very tight, an emergency has occurred, you have to move that person. In the moment, the respondents do what they can, because the priority is to find them a physically safe space to be. But going back to your point earlier about mental health implications, the mental health implications of taking someone away from what is a very secure and safe environment through another space, no fault of anyone's own, because it's an environmental emergency, can have a lasting impact. And for the elderly, unfortunately, that can be something that could have an impact on their life expectancy, because they carry that with them as well.
And I think it's just so hard for services anyway. A lot of the time the services that would be responding to this, resilient services, are probably overstretched. But it's the little things as well. I'd imagine if you're moving people who are like elderly, they'll probably have like medication, and it's like, oh my, like, are you moving them out of like an area where the doctor's was only a 5-minute walk? Is it now a drive? Or it suddenly everything becomes
Can
like
they drive?
It just becomes like a bigger problem altogether kind of thing compared to what it was previously.
But if you have a plan in place for an emergency,
we're going to have resilience plans.
If you have a plan in place, then hopefully in that plan you've identified the next pharmacy that could be closest. So you have a network of contacts, or kind of a primary or secondary plan B, C. I love a plan B and a plan C. If that one fails, then we go to plan D. And it's not perfect, but it's just going back to planning before the emergency happens. So at least the person who needs to be displaced is prepared for it mentally. But also they're not going to an unknown, because that plan has already been arranged beforehand. And I think that's the message here, is we need to get better at planning for these emergencies.
As an individual. Because a lot of the resilience teams that are planning will have lots of plans in place. They'll have lots of things for different scenarios. But actually, we as individuals need to make sure we've got plans. I don't know where I'd go, actually.
If you give them the support, if you imagine if imagine you had an elderly relative who lived in a beautiful spot like was described there, and you sat down with them and said, let's come up with a plan, because we love where you live and it's gorgeous, but we also know that it can flood from time to time. So we'll have a plan here, so if something does happen and I'm 2 hours away, and by the time I get here, if the emergency services show up, you can give them the plan so they know what the plan is. But it's something that at least they feel like they have control, or they have
because they've been part of it,
the
part of the plan. They've helped write their own plan. I think it's a good thing as well. So keeping that autonomy, isn't it? Keeping that kind of control. But it is worth having, because like you say, the relatives could be 2 hours away before they even get here. It's like there's only so many cups of tea you can probably drink in the community centre. So come on, I used to run you round for football. Now you're taking your time.
I am from Bangladesh. It was a kind of, what should I say? It was kind of devastating, and there was lots of human loss, and lots of the people lost so many things, like their house, their land, so many things. And the most damaging flood in my country was in 1988, and it was extreme. Since I was not born that time, so I didn't know how it was, but I heard from my family, from my neighbors, that it was extremely, devastating.
Loss of life.
Yes.
That is, I think, if the young man that was just talking was saying he wasn't even born in 1988 when the flooding happened in his country of Bangladesh. It's now 2024 and people are still talking about it. We know that was devastating. We know that he wasn't just saying people lost their homes and their land. It's a loss of life. And it's, I don't know about that flood, but when somebody says loss of life, to me, that sounded like there was a lot of life lost. And I know in this country we've also lost people when flooding's happened, and I don't want to be the person that has to tell somebody, I'm sorry, but your family's not coming home tonight.
I think that's the thing. Usually with flooding, we talk about the damage of flooding in financial terms, but the reality is it can take lives.
And it's something you can't replace.
It does to this day. And if you look at the recent floods in the last couple of years, there would have been people that lost their lives as well.
Up in Scotland.
Yes,
there's a couple died recently.
We've had a few events where people have lost their lives, and I think it's just remembering that if anything we can do through planning can hopefully make our communities just a bit more protected and keep more people safe, then it's worth it. Because you're right, you don't want to be the person to tell a family member that somebody's died from a flood.
Or just in general, but it's just, I couldn't imagine what it's like to have to say. And I know there's people that do that as part of the job, but I just couldn't. It's sad. It's real sad, especially on that kind of scale.
So I'm very fortunate in the fact that I've never experienced the negative impacts of flooding, but I am actively aware of its impacts. Not everyone is fortunate enough to live at the top of a hill, but I know how volatile water can be and the impacts of it and how it can be fast rising.
Yeah, I mean, the area I live in, it's a valley, and quite a lot of people do get flooded. But we intentionally purchased our house on top of a hill so we wouldn't get flooded. Yeah, and in fact, in the valley where I live, this is many decades ago, the reservoir burst and killed a lot of people. Because I live at the top of a valley next to a big raw water reservoir that burst its banks. I think it might have been the 40s or earlier.
Yeah, so there's two things there, isn't it? The top of the hill analogy again, and we've talked about it.
Yeah, but I think as well what people need to appreciate is like, you might be at the top of the hill and chances are you're probably going to most of the time be all right.
You're not the highest hill.
But if your school or work or hospital is down the valley and over on the other hill, then
it still gets you. It's still going to access any of the services that you need.
Or you're going to have to do a longer trip. Do you remember there was a bridge in Cumbria which was just completely washed out, and people, instead of just nipping to the shop for 10 minutes, had to take an hour. It was. So it's not. It's this top of the hill myth. But again, you mentioned how there was a lot of people died as well, and it's more common than people think, I think, and that's what's quite devastating. Yeah. It really is devastating.
Do you have any experience, like personal experience with flooding?
I don't, but obviously kind of see a lot on the news, don't you? So although I've never experienced it, I have probably a bit of a vested interest in the environment. I go to the Lake District quite a bit, and I'd be a little bit wary now of swimming in Lake Windermere because of how polluted that is now from kind of flooding and overflows, etc.
Well, that one is interesting because that talks about the kind of after effect of large scale flooding. So you have this massive flood and it just washes everything in its wake. And usually that ends up in a waterway or a river somehow.
There is as well, but sometimes a little bit of the beauty, if there is any beauty, with a big flash flood and the quantity of water coming down is actually because there's a lot of fresh water getting in there from the rain. So the pollution almost comes a little bit more diluted, but it will be the after cleanup, all those like little pockets of gullies and things where the water got trapped and it's become stagnant. And, but there's a lot of the water companies do big cleanups and things like that as well to help. And a lot of the councils and things do as well. But yeah, I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? And there's
very
also
complex.
It is very complex
system.
but we should learn not to put certain products down toilets.
Right, lessons learned. Next.
I have some friends that have a place in the Lake District that we quite often visit, and that has been flooded multiple times. So they've got quite a lot of flood barriers in place, and we need to be very careful whenever we go that, make sure the barriers are in place before you go out for the day in case there's flooding. So it's a very real you know, in this particular village, it's happened multiple times. So they are so ingrained in them to know that actually, you know, this little really innocent looking stream that's flowing through this picturesque village is liable to cause some pretty severe devastation if the weather conditions change.
That is a good one though, because I think on one hand there are communities like that one where they've just been hit so many times. They have systems in place, they have plans in place, and they understand the importance of having plans in place. And I think for me is taking that learning and sharing it. So others can learn from their experience as opposed to waiting for it to happen to you before having to learn the hard way.
Definitely, because when I was at one of the conferences, there's a little town up in Scotland called Ensel, and I was really impressed with what that community have done. They got flooded, they came together and they were like, this ain't happening again to us. And they applied for grants, they got the information they needed. They've now got sensors and different things in place. But what they do, which I thought was great, was whenever the sensors go off, they all come together as a community. They meet at this like shed, they put all the barriers out. But all the lessons learned, they pay forward to the next time. And I thought that was really, really important, because often we get caught in the moment or we get caught in the cleanup and we forget to pay forward the lessons, and that's what we really need to do. I also like the fact that he was a retired copper, and he was like, well, I'm going to be in charge of this cleanup because I'm the police, ex-police. but it was a really good story of how we can get that community and that resilience. In small communities, it might be easier to achieve because everybody still probably knows each other. In bigger cities, it might be a bit harder because we're a bit more fast-paced and we're a bit moving about. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't do it. We just have to think about it in a different way and find the community in a different way. But I do love a bit of community work. I do love it.
No, that's a good one. I quite liked it.
I personally am very happy to say I've never been flooded. But in the great deluge of 2012, I lived in Jesmond, and the water went roaring down our street, straight into one of the houses, and just went straight through the house out the other side. It was turned into a river. It was astonishing to me. And it made me realise how in Jesmond and in the Ousbourne Valley, we're right on top of loads of streams, and they're very much at threat of flooding.
That's an interesting one, because in 2012, obviously I worked for Northumbrian Water. I was a flooding protection coordinator. So I was very much visiting a lot of homes around the Northeast who had experienced just devastating floods located in areas that would have had streams and water courses and culverted water courses. A lot of them with burns in their names. So it's that narrative, it's people understanding that historically that area would have been part of the water cycle in one way or another. So you're living with the threat of flood risk, and it's making sure that you have the plans in place and you've got the resilient measures in place to protect your home and protect your family. So that's a very relevant point in many parts of the Northeast.
And I think it actually reminds me of it. Well, it's not really a funny story, but it's definitely that darker humour that we have as British people. Where there was one guy who kept getting flooded, and it got to the point where when it started to flood, he just went, you know what? I opened the front door, I opened the back door, and I just let it go through, and I go to the pub. So
there were actually a lot of people that I spoke to that did that with their garages.
Yeah.
So I remember I used to go visit people, and I said, look, our designers have looked at this area and they think you're at risk of flooding. And they were like, I didn't flood. I was like, are you sure? Because we know the water got to this level. We have pictures. And they were like, I didn't flood because I just opened the garage and I opened the back door and I let the flooding through, so I didn't flood. I was like, well, that's still flooding. You just helped reduce the damage by it's flooding. But that actually is a reality. There were a lot of people I spoke to that said the same thing. They just let it pass through. Some people had been a bit more creative. They'd created like pipe systems that basically piped the flood through. It was usually through garages and stuff, but very common.
And sometimes you just got to go with it and go to the pub.
But okay.
Other establishments for drinks and food are available.
The Environment Agency are we're first responders for flood events. So Whenever there is a large flood event, we go into incident mode. One of our main focuses is an area in Newcastle called the River Ousburn, and the Ousburn has a history of flooding, particularly in residential areas. So we're looking at trying to keep the floodwaters. We're looking at projects, which would be an option for keeping floodwaters further up in the catchment, in the rural end of the catchment.
I love how we're now starting to look at, we talk about source, pathway, receptor. So like where the water lands, where it flows, and who gets the issue to deal with. I love that we're actually moving up catchments. I love that we're going back to source. And I think it was actually the EA up in the northeast who started doing the leaky dams originally. But I've seen recently they've allowed the beavers to go back to doing the leaky dams because they do it so well.
Yeah,
like nature.
Yeah, nature-based solutions is getting a lot of funding at the moment. The Environment Agency put out some special programs to promote nature-based solutions, and I think as an industry we're looking more at nature-based interventions as well. So kind of steering away from the over-reliance to like grey systems and pipe systems, and actually looking to nature for inspiration. Like they've been doing this before.
Before we did.
Why haven't we thought to like mimic leaky dams before now? So it's good to see that is becoming the norm as opposed to the exception.
But also the other thing with nature-based solutions is how many other things are benefited. So you can create cooling from like water evaporation, you're getting habitat creation, you're getting biodiversity, and like somebody said earlier on in one of the clips, they like going to the Lake District because it's nice. It's that amenity. It's that being outside. It's, getting those places that are fun to be in. So there's so much more that you get from a nature-based solution. And actually, a lot of the time, what people probably don't realise is they're probably seeing somewhere that's been designed and it looks really nice and it's got all these nice features, but its primary purpose is probably a sustainable urban drainage system.
Exactly. It has an underlying function that protects your home and protects your lovely street.
And it gets you some nice wildlife.
Exactly.
I haven't personally been involved in a flooding relating incident that affected my home or family per se, but earlier on in my career I was a project manager for flood alleviation schemes, and that led to me being on site and working with our customers who had been impacted very recently. It's horrendous. It's not something you would want anybody to go through. Personal possessions, intrusion in that kind of personal space.
We've talked about loss of life and everything like that, and there was another lecture that I attended where people were saying this village got really badly flooded, and they had to go in, and somebody had been removed from their home and they had to go into care, but they'd actually previously lost their daughter. So while they were in the sheltered accommodation, I think it was, the builders and people went in and they were cleaning out this home, and they said to me, one of the villagers was walking past, and they wouldn't have known because like the amount of bacteria and everything that you get from flood water is horrible. And there was a picture of this woman's daughter that had been thrown in the skip. And it's not all she has of her. She's got her own personal memories, but those things like that, they're huge to lose on, and I think it's just, you can replace a sofa, you can replace your dining room table and chairs, but losing...
Can't replace a moment.
You can't, no, you just can't, can you? And it's just, makes me want to cry thinking about it, because it's just so... I think it's just some of the stuff that you come across with the communities and that, it's just so emotive, and you feel for them, and it's hard when you're trying to do your job as like the LLFA or the council or the Environment Agency or the Water Board, because there is only so much you can do. The resource and the finances are stretched, and it's just devastating, because you, on a personal level, feel so much for them inside, and then you're really limited, and it's heartbreaking.
That's something that needs more research. There's a lot more research becoming available on the impact on flooding on people who experience the flooding. But the other part of the research is the people that go in to help them, and they witness the devastation, the witness they see people at their most rawest form, and you take that with you. You take that home with you. And if that's your career and that's a lifetime of pain you can end up carrying with you. So it's looking at how we can better support people that work in that space as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. And because you've got all your own things going on as well. We once had a member of staff whose home got flooded during 2012 and was out helping others doing the highway. You know, can you imagine like being the wife or the husband, that person, you know, like you're on the phone going, look, we're flooded. What are you going to do? Well, I can't because I'm at work and there's an emergency situation and they need us. It's like
the choices you have to make.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think that's a good place to leave things. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. And for further information on the topics we've discussed, check out our episode notes. Project Groundwater, aka PGN, is a research and innovation project funded by DEFRA as part of the 200 million Flood and Coastal Innovation Programs managed by the Environment Agency. The programs will drive innovation in flood and coastal resilience and adaptation to a changing climate. This project is led by Gateshead Council with regional and national partners. PGN aims to enhance community resilience by developing and creating, mapping, forecasting and warning systems with a focus on groundwater flood risk, particularly in former mining areas within the region, but also on a national scale. With this funding, we're working on practical innovative actions and knowledge sharing with our communities at the heart of it all. For more information on PGN, please visit www.pgn.org.uk.